It's the world's most expensive and mysterious aircraft. High-flying, highly classified, and deadly accurate.
The most accurate bombing in the history of air warfare.
For 2 decades, the B-2 stealth bomber has defied skeptics and mystified enemies. This is the inside story.
I could feel the bombs going off before they disappeared.
How the B-2 switched course.
It had never been tested.
Overcame critics and tragedy to change the shape of aviation forever. February 2011. The Arab Spring blooms in Libya. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi orders his army to attack his own people. An outraged international community responds, and the United Nations declares all of Libya a no-fly zone. But how best to enforce it? 5,000 miles away in Missouri, inside Whiteman Air Force Base, strict security surrounds the flight line. Here, specially trained maintenance crews prepare the world's most secretive aircraft for possible combat. Whiteman has housed the B-2s in climate-controlled hangars for 20 years. Keeping them combat-ready is no easy feat.
The skill level for the members that are working on the B-2 in particular is very unique. It takes anywhere from 3 to 4 years to be qualified and experienced on this aircraft.
The skin of the bombers must be free of any dents to maintain optimum stealth.
This individual up here is performing a post-flight inspection on the aircraft to determine if there are any anomalies or defects that need to be fixed. There's a lot more that goes into keeping this aircraft healthy and the amount of hours it takes to maintain the stealth capabilities.
In March 2011, the call comes to prep for a possible mission in Libya. The 6 B-2 pilots with the most experience receive an unusual top-secret order. They are told to sleep.
Crew rest is the 12 hours prior to showing up to fly that a pilot is mandated to have to do nothing.
Retired Colonel Eric Single was the first pilot ever to fly the B-2 in combat. He found pre-mission rest next to impossible.
You're trying to rest, but at the same time you're pretty excited trying to get some sleep during the middle of the day. Never works out with wives and kids and daytime outside. So it's tough to do, but you get as much rest and mental preparation as you can.
Military chiefs ask for 3 stealth bombers to do in Libya what they've become known for, knocking down the door.
That means the B-2 is assigned to take down key targets on night 1 of the campaign. By knocking down the door, you weaken the enemy's air defenses.
Author Dr. Rebecca Grant is the foremost civilian expert on the B-2.
Libya is an example of how much the B-2 is in demand. Its missions were classic B-2. Make sure that Gaddafi could not use the remnants of his air force to challenge NATO aircraft, enforcing the no-fly zone.
The Flight Equipment Department is the last stop before pilots board the plane. They collect survival gear, including a 9mm handgun, in case they're shot down over enemy territory. Then, out to their bombers. There is only one way into a B-2, the stairs on its belly, and two ways out, the stairs again, or the emergency ejection seats. The inside is classified, but we can tell you there's a huge sloping windscreen with an equally huge instrument panel. Behind the two pilot seats, a rectangular floor space, 4 foot by 6 foot, just big enough to lie down. Then a toilet. Sorry, limited capacity and no partitions. And a microwave to warm up bomber dogs, a pilot favorite. March 18, commanders send 3 B-2s to attack in Libya. Enough to inflict the damage of more than 100 conventional aircraft. They'll be in Libya in 12 hours, and still, only a select few know they're going. For most of the way, the B-2s appear on radar as ordinary aircraft. They mostly fly on autopilot. But that doesn't mean rest for the 2-person crew aboard each bomber. They must deal with the many systems on board and talk with civilian and military air controllers to avoid a mid-air collision.
The one thing about the B-2 is it's an intellectually challenging aircraft.
Colonel Kristen Goodwin is Vice Wing Commander at Whiteman. She's also an active B-2 pilot.
You're always getting updates. You're ensuring that your system is accurate. You're making sure your timing is right. You're usually working with 1 or 2 other aircraft in formation. It is a very busy time from takeoff to landing. There's not a lot of time to sit back.
As the 3 B-2s near the Libyan border, NATO confirms Gaddafi has not backed down. The mission is a go. Time to stealth up. In the top-secret cockpit of the world's most expensive aircraft, there is a button little bigger than a letter on your keyboard and marked with the word pen for penetration. The pen button retracts protruding antennae and tucks navigation lights into diamond-shaped panels. Much else is classified, but it's known that the shape of the bomber takes radar waves and bends or scatters them. Having no tail significantly reduces the radar's signature, while the sawtooth pattern that replaces the tail also disperses engine heat and infrared signatures. The special coating of the plane absorbs and breaks up radar waves, as does the windshield. To do so, it's treated with a thin layer of 24-karat gold. A B-2 in full stealth mode has the radar signature of a seagull. A very quiet one.
Once you go into enemy territory, you're really not talking to anybody at that point because you want to minimize your transmissions, and even a radio transmission is an emission. So for a stealthy airplane, you don't want to do any of that.
The 150-ton B-2s will be hard to detect over Libya, but not invisible to the naked eye. The moon is at its brightest, making pilots nervous. If spotted, they are vulnerable. They cannot outfly or outmaneuver a fighter jet, nor do they have any weapons to fight back. Stealth is all they've got. On the ground in Libya, Gaddafi's soldiers stand at high alert with SA-5 Gammon surface-to-air missiles that can fire with accuracy to an altitude of 65,000 feet. A serious threat. 12 hours after leaving Missouri, the B-2s cross the border of Libya under the cover of darkness. Already, they've loaded their satellite-guided weapons with target coordinates. Now it's go time. The primary target, Gaddafi's airfields and hangars. But suddenly, there's a problem. In one of the B-2s, a 1-ton bomb jams in the rotary launcher. In other types of aircraft, there is access to the bombs, but not in the B-2. The pilots can't see, but they know.
The system is very quick. You know instantaneously if you have the hung weapon because you can actually watch the display and watch the weapons leave the pylon on your display. So if one of them doesn't, you get a big yellow hash mark through it.
They rotate the launcher to discharge the next bomb. It also fails to dislodge. And then another. 3 1-ton bombs hopelessly jammed. Two stealth bombers unleash their full payload of bombs, a devastating assault on Libya's air forces. They drop 16 1-ton bombs each, all dead on target. The third B-2, not so effective. 3 bombs jam in the launcher, and there's no fix this far from home.
When you fly a bomber, one of the things you're always concerned about is getting a hung ordnance.
Colonel Tony Imandi was one of the first B-2 combat pilots, and he trained many others.
You try to drop a bomb, it tries to drop for whatever reason, it gets hung up and it's stuck in your weapons bay. It's either hanging by a wire or it didn't fire. So you're not sure exactly what the problem is.
When pilots open a B-2's bomb bay doors, the aircraft is more visible to radar. If Gaddafi's fighter jets locate a B-2 and show up to attack, that B-2 has no way of defending itself. Stealth is the only ace up its sleeve. The pilots have no choice. They drop all they can and hit 13 of their 16 targets, but must then head for home. 3 dodgy bombs still aboard.
You have to be safe. So in most cases, you keep the weapons bay doors closed, and if you can, you will put that weapon in a position where it can't fall out. So if you happen to have a rotary launcher, per se, you can rotate the launcher and put the bomb on the top.
Gaddafi's surface-to-air missiles don't come close to hitting a B-2. Even with one of the 3 planes compromised, the B-2s hold enough firepower to wipe out all 45 of Gaddafi's hardened aircraft shelters. The stealth bomber has knocked down the door in Libya. Gaddafi and the world know it. The bombers make their way home as President Obama makes it official.
Today, I authorize the Armed Forces of the United States to begin a limited military action in Libya.
The stealth bombers near Whiteman after 24 hours of non-stop flying. There's still no time to rest for the pilots carrying the 3 jammed bombs. Their aircraft gets special treatment.
When you land, you must treat that bomb as if it's live and as if it's going to fall off. So you do special procedures when you land. You go to a special place on the airfield. They call out special people, and you just very carefully open the airplane up inch by inch to make sure that the bomb's not resting on the doors or anything. And God forbid you have an accident, you're far enough away that you wouldn't hurt other people.
7 months later, a NATO aircraft hits Gaddafi's convoy as he tries to escape. Rebels find him hiding in a drainage pipe. The conflict is over.
I think that the use of the B-2 in Libya probably had the added benefit of sending a message to others in the region that, yes, here is very effective U.S. air power.
Libya was the B-2's fourth combat mission, all of them originating from one place, Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. It was December 17, 1993, that a crowd first gathered here to greet the nation's most closely kept aviation secret. 172 feet of aircraft, all wing, no tail. The B-2 spirit made a lasting impression.
I think every four-star general in the Air Force was assembled at the airfield to watch the B-2 fly in.
The spirit of Missouri is home. The B-2 has reached their final parking position in front of the dais. General Lowe has shut down her engines, and now begins the ceremony officially welcoming the plane.
Its arrival represents more than a technical leap forward. It adds a revolutionary new dimension to air warfare.
When I saw it in flight, I thought, wow, this thing is special. It really, the word majestic came to mind.
It just has a presence of power and precision. And I'll tell you what, if you're on the end of the runway and you see that B-2 take off, you say, I'm really glad that it's on our side.
The first American aircraft anything like the B-2 emerged in the 1940s with the XB-35. A bat-wing shape was designed to create maximum airlift for long-range bombing missions. The YB-49 followed it. Same shape, more advanced, but stealth was still not a consideration. That came in the 1960s with a focus on the Cold War. Lockheed built the SR-71 and gave it some stealth qualities, including a skin with special radar-absorbing materials. The SR-71 was a long-range spy plane, but not a nuclear war deterrent. For that, the United States needed a stealth bomber.
So the mission of the B-2 was to use stealth to penetrate the borders of the Soviet Union and fly a long mission, drop nuclear bombs, and return.
Reducing the radar signature meant no tail and a curved design. Ideas and innovations that took a leap forward with a paper published in 1964 by a mathematician on the other side.
Stealth was actually based on some calculations done by a Russian. They were translated and read by a man at Lockheed who realized that you could use these principles to calculate a way to reduce radar return, and from those calculations, build an aircraft.
Weapons giant the Northrop Corporation combined the stealth design with radar-absorbing paint and materials. The stealth code was cracked. They could make a plane invisible to radar, but they couldn't hide the price tag. $2.13 billion per plane. At the time, the same cost as 13 747 passenger jets. Why so much? Just over $1 billion per plane for materials and manufacture, making the B-2 literally worth its weight in gold. Then, Northrop also had to set up a special top-secret plant to build the planes. And before that, they spent $20 billion on research and development. That cost was to be spread over the initial order of 132 aircraft, but only 21 were ever built.
The B-2, in a way, had the bad luck to fly the first time in the summer of 1989. That was about 5 months before the Berlin Wall fell. And as we remember, as the Cold War ended, there was a great reevaluation of whether we needed to have a military as large as we did. And one of the programs that came under scrutiny was the B-2 bomber.
20 B-2s remain. The 21st became a case study. Even a $2 billion plane can have a fatal flaw. February 23, 2008. The Spirit of Kansas takes off from the U.S. Air Force Base in Guam, the end of a 4-month deployment. The jet pitches up, then stalls. The pilots have a split second to work out if they can save the plane. Then, a wing hits the ground. They realize all is lost, and they eject. Just 17 seconds after takeoff, the B-2 crashes and bursts into flames. The culprit? Water. Guam's humidity causes speed sensors to malfunction. They tell the system it's going 14 miles an hour faster than its actual acceleration. The onboard computer commands full nose up. But without enough speed to support their high-pitched takeoff, they lose lift and crash.
One good thing about the Guam crash was it turned out to have a very clear answer. It was a pretty easy item to fix on the maintenance checklist.
Other B-2 pilots find great comfort in the safe ejection of their colleagues.
You don't know till you first use the seat if it's going to work. And the seats worked, and they were alive to tell us what happened to that B-2.
Similar for the plane itself. Would it work in combat? Some wondered if the B-2 would ever be tested. After first delivery to Whiteman, the B-2s sat at the ready for 6 long years. With the Cold War over, they languished. Then, the stealth bomber finally got its chance. Not in Russia or the Middle East, but in Yugoslavia.
We would have never picked Yugoslavia as a place where we thought the B-2 would cut its teeth, its combat teeth, but that's what happened.
January 1999. Serbian security forces execute 45 Kosovo Albanians. It's the latest wave of violence in what becomes known globally as ethnic cleansing.
Thousands of people have been forced from villages, from their homes, at gunpoint, have been robbed, beaten, extorted, men separated from their families, families forced to walk through minefields across borders.
This is a humanitarian catastrophe that we have to avoid. There are tens of thousands of people that will die or be driven from their homes.
Serbian leader Slobodan Milosevic amasses his forces on the Kosovo border. Fighting escalates.
The former Yugoslavia is in full-on disintegration. This brings on the Kosovo crisis, and NATO decides for the first time in its history to go to war.
President Clinton calls on Whiteman's B-2 commanders. After a decade of nothing but practice runs, the stealth bombers finally have the chance to show what they can do.
When the call came, we were more than ready. We were anxious.
It falls on Colonel Tony Amandi to pick the airmen. No one has ever flown the B-2 in combat. All 50 pilots want the chance. Tony must choose 4.
It was the quiet, competent aviator that we were looking for, one who wasn't looking to collect medals and trophies for his trophy case, but yet worked silently and diligently with a team member, there are 2 pilots in a B-2, to get the job done.
One of them is Eric Single.
Very huge responsibility. You knew the airplane, you knew the mission, but it had never been tested. So you had a lot of unknowns out there.
Also set to make its combat debut in Kosovo, the JDAM. A JDAM is a Boeing-built attachment that converts any number of free-falling bombs into precision-guided weapons. Bomb loaders strap on the movable tail fins and the GPS guidance systems. The B-2 can carry 16 2,000-pound JDAM bombs, or as many as 80 500-pound JDAMs.
We were training with the JDAM weapon in our weapon system, but like most training days, we don't go out and drop a lot of weapons in training because they're expensive and we just can't afford to. So there was some question in my mind how the JDAM was going to perform in its first combat venture as well as the B-2.
No more drills. It's a live run. March 23, 1999. 4 pilots in 2 B-2 bombers take off for Kosovo. For their first combat mission, a 30-hour return trip. As they reach the Mediterranean, they appear on radar as regular aircraft.
Air traffic control kept telling us, hey, you know, how far are you going up here? Don't you know, that's all restricted airspace up there. And eventually we just had to turn them off because they kept asking questions we couldn't answer about who we were and where we were going and that type of thing.
The 2 B-2s enter stealth mode. Pilots also switch off all unnecessary lights on the flight deck and climb to an altitude that reduces their contrails. A computer displays the best strategy. It shows up on screen as a blue line.
The blue line is the course the B-2 pilots choose in order to maximize the stealth properties of their aircraft and elude most of the threats from surface-to-air missiles or from enemy fighters. It uses everything the B-2 has: stealth, speed, altitude, heading, in order to maximize its chance of succeeding on the mission.
The real question was, would the enemy be able to see us? Would they send fighters up to join on us? Would they try to engage with us? Or would all the money we invested in this airplane finally pay off?
The former Yugoslavia has pretty formidable air defenses. They have an air force of about 90 aircraft. They have modern surface-to-air missiles. They've already given NATO pilots an occasional run for their money over this airspace.
You're over enemy territory for a good hour, hour and a half. Your eyes are glued there to make sure that nobody's tracking you or even seeing you out there.
It's a cold spring night over Kosovo. 14 hours into their flight, pilots confirm the mission is a go. The aircraft shudder as they discharge 5 bombs from twin rotary pylons. The B-2's guided bombs strike Serbian airfields. 32 direct hits. The Serbs scramble a dozen MiG-29s. The enemy fighters scan the night sky for the B-2s. It's tense and dangerous.
We did hear, that the fighters were airborne. That kind of gives you pause.
NATO sends up fighter jets for added protection, but the B-2s follow their blue lines out of conflict. No sign of detection. Night 1, triumph and relief. When they returned to Whiteman, Senior Master Sergeant Craig Smith was there.
When we get a call to find out that it did its mission and what we'd been working towards for 6 years and not really knowing if it was going to work in combat, and to finally hear them say that aircraft has performed its mission and returning to Whiteman was a sense of success and pride at the same time.
But it's far from over. Whiteman expected the B-2s to be used for the first 3 days of the war only. Instead, NATO commanders call on the bombers again and again.
The objective was just to fly for 3 nights, hit hard, and convince Milosevic to give up his persecution of the ethnic Albanians. What happened, in fact, was that NATO ended up running a 78-day air war. They deployed more aircraft, they dug in, and they decided to fight it out.
The weather in Yugoslavia was bad, and the B-2 was the only weapon system that had the J-down. So for 78 days, that war continued, and we continued to fly B-2 sorties in support of that war.
The demand strains resources, but the results speak for themselves. 8 out of 10 targets hit on the first pass. In the first 8 weeks of combat, the B-2s only fly 3% of the combat sorties, but strike 33% of all targets.
Kosovo really proved that the naysayers were wrong about the B-2. The combination of stealth and precision was everything that the advocates of the B-2 had ever hoped for and more.
The high-tech debut impresses military leaders. Pilots can program their satellite-guided bombs while en route, or reprogram to change their targets at a moment's notice. It's an A+ report card until a devastating mishap. In the middle of the 3-month-long Kosovo conflict, 5 bombs from a B-2 hit the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. 3 Chinese journalists lay dead, 27 others injured. It's an international disaster that threatens peacekeeping efforts and brings the B-2 under diplomatic fire.
The B-2 with JDAM was incredibly accurate. Program in the coordinates, and that's where the bomb will hit.
The U.S. Air Force immediately launches an investigation. In Washington, they exonerate the B-2 and blame the CIA, who provided the coordinates.
The attack was a mistake.
I find it embarrassing that we didn't have in our databases the precise location of the Chinese embassy.
The bombing of the Chinese embassy was a huge controversy, but a black eye perhaps more for the intelligence system overall than for the B-2 itself. In a strange way, it proved everything we'd already seen with the B-2. It was devastatingly accurate.
On June 10, 1999, the war in Kosovo ends when Serbia finally agrees to a peace deal. NATO used no ground forces at all, but relied entirely on air power. The B-2's debut role was crucial. President Clinton visits Whiteman for the celebration.
Most Americans will never know how hard this was or how hard our forces worked. The pilots, the crews, the people who make it happen on the ground. But I want you to know that we are very proud of you.
Kosovo was the B-2's shakedown conflict, and its operators learn important lessons. Each sortie to Kosovo and back meant some 30 hours in the air. The pilots are supposed to take turns sleeping, but adrenaline makes that tough.
Some guys couldn't sleep, too keyed up on the missions. You know, they came back, said, nah, I was awake the whole darn time.
Most are hit by a wall of fatigue shortly after they drop their bombs.
Oh, the letdown. We all know how that feels when we've just succeeded at a really stressful task. Your whole body is crying out to relax and sleep. And that's one of the most difficult moments for the B-2 pilots to deal with.
All the adrenaline obviously had worn off. You'd been up for 30 hours. You were pretty much exhausted by that time. Probably never in my life have I been more tired than we were in the traffic pattern coming in for that final approach and landing.
Part of the problem, this was a plane built for stealth, not comfort, especially for missions 20 or 40 hours long.
Engineers, when they built the aircraft, they didn't put a lot of thought into the human dynamics of flying long durations. They put all their energy into the stealthiness of the plane and its capabilities. It's not about comfort.
The only space to lie down is on a hard floor by the toilet. Eric Single improvises. He fits his $2.1 billion aircraft with a folding lawn chair. Price tag, $8.88.
I got a lot of funny looks the first time we brought it out there until a couple other people tried using it, and they said, this is wonderful. This beats the heck out of laying on the floor.
After Kosovo, Whiteman also brings in experts in sleep deprivation.
We got a lot of input from the medical profession on how best to manage your circadian rhythms, what type of foods to eat.
Physiologists say naps are most effective if only half an hour long, or else 3 to 4 hours. For mid-range missions, 97% of pilots say they benefit from chemical uppers like caffeine and prescription amphetamines. The plane itself must also adapt to stay ahead of countermeasures. It's updated with new satellite communications and other advances in technology. These are ready to go in 2001, when America faces her darkest hour since Pearl Harbor. September 11, 2001. Terrorist attack on U.S. soil. The B-2 becomes a critical part of the military response.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan sits clearly in America's crosshairs. But the sheer distance represents the greatest challenge yet for the B-2 and its crew. Commanders deploy 6 stealth bombers for a 3-day campaign. From Whiteman to Afghanistan and back becomes the longest non-stop bombing mission in history. More than 44 hours of continuous flight. The B-2's range is only 6,000 miles, less than a 747 passenger jet. To answer the call in such a faraway place, the B-2 must rely more than ever on partners in the sky. Mid-air refueling tankers.
It's one of the tougher parts of flying the B-2 because you're flying so close to another large airplane.
On the way to Afghanistan, both pilots must take their seats each time they align with a tanker.
You have to be very precise about where you place your airplane. The boom on a tanker is steerable by the boom operator, but it's only steerable within about a 20-foot box.
Even tougher, the B-2's 4 engines sit buried in the upper portion of the wings, and therefore above the center line. This helps with stealth, but it means the nose drops whenever the plane accelerates.
It is manual because you're flying the jet by hand. There is no autopilot that does that. There's no automatic air refueling, and you are probably the toughest part of it is the concentration piece of it. You're taking on 150,000 pounds of fuel through the little tanker boom there, and you could have to stay plugged on for 30 to 40 minutes.
A wrong move from either aircraft could be disastrous.
A lot of guys get what we call the 10-minute wanders. You sometimes lose concentration and you focus on that, and you'll find yourself all of a sudden wandering off your visual cues there and having to get back on them.
The B-2s mid-air refuel as many as 5 times just to get to Afghanistan. But once there, they knock down the doors. The targets are few and poorly defended. As expected, their mission is over in just 3 days. But there's not long to wait before the B-2 is tapped for another combat zone. One far more dangerous.
Operation Iraqi Freedom, or Gulf War II, began in March of 2003. It was very different from the operations in Afghanistan because Saddam Hussein had a major army, a significant air force, and dense surface-to-air missiles. Even though the coalition had been flying over the no-fly zones and picking away at these air defenses, Iraq, and Baghdad especially, was still a very heavily defended target.
At Whiteman, there's an impending sense that something is going to happen. Pilots fine-tune their flight equipment and survival gear.
But if everything feels good?
Yeah, it feels good so far.
Kosovo and Afghanistan taught the squadron a great deal about comfort.
Come into our main shop. This is our main work area. This is where we do all the equipment at. We work on helmets, harnesses, parachutes, you name it, we have it. All our storage areas.
Sergeant Dennis Spiker runs the life support room.
What they would do is they would come and we would have to issue out a long duration bag. This is strictly another sleeping cot that we're looking into. It's lightweight, really quick and easy. Urinary bags, if they need them, we call them piddle packs. Basically, if they need to go pee. If they need to relieve themselves, they use a bag for that. This tester right here is their Scott tester. This is how they pre-flight their equipment, their helmet and mask, to make sure communications work, good airflow in the oxygen supply mask.
From here, shuttle drivers deliver pilots to the B-2s. They take off, hit the ideal cruising altitude of 50,000 feet, and settle in. Their targets sit 19 hours away in Iraq. As they draw close, they arm their bombs and move to combat altitude, a classified height. They stealth up, charge in, and drop their bombs. This is the first night of what becomes known as shock and awe, and the B-2 delivers both. Specific B-2 targets remain classified, but bombs hammer the Council of Ministries building, and the whole world gets an upfront look at American firepower. The B-2 bomb raids decimate Saddam's air force, but his ground forces remain formidable. And a week into the war, he catches a break. A massive sandstorm engulfs Allied ground forces fighting toward Baghdad.
Saddam Hussein saw this sandstorm as perhaps his last big chance. He thought that as the ground forces stopped, he could start to use the irregular forces to attack the rear areas and these strung out lines.
American soldiers hunker down. they're vulnerable to attack. In Iraq, U.S. commanders decide to experiment. Could a lone B-2 attack Saddam Hussein's forces through a blizzard of sand?
Saddam Hussein thought that nothing could fly during the sandstorm and that his elite Republican Guards armored forces would be safe.
But a B-2 can see where others cannot.
A B-2 was used to fly during the storm, to use its synthetic aperture radar and check for revetted tanks and heavy armor in one of the key Republican Guards divisions guarding Baghdad.
Synthetic aperture radar uses the movement of the aircraft to collect information from multiple points and create an image of a target. A B-2 moves in and flies high above the sandstorm. Its radar sees through the sand to tanks and control stations on the ground. The pilots identify 16 targets and bomb each one with lethal precision. They blow the Iraqi army to smithereens, and with it, Saddam's last hope.
That was a very unique watershed for the B-2. It showed that the B-2 could go out and support the role of the ground forces and carry out strategic attacks against Saddam Hussein's elite Republican Guard forces, even with the howling sandstorm.
The B-2 looks the same on the outside as it did 20 years ago. But it's a newer, smarter machine with numerous top-secret advances. The secret science behind the stealth bomber remains the envy of the world. And it remains secret, despite at least 2 serious espionage attempts. One in 1984, when the Russian embassy got a call from a Northrop employee attempting to sell B-2 secrets worth billions of dollars. His price, $25,000. In the end, he paid with 16 years in prison. And in 2011, Noshir Gawadia, the self-proclaimed father of the B-2, was arrested by the FBI and sentenced for leaking B-2 secrets to the Chinese. 32 years in prison, no parole. Even after 20 years of service, the B-2 is still one of a kind.
For the most part, the secrets of the B-2 stealth technology have been very well kept. We know quite a bit about it, and yet the real secret sauce that keeps the B-2 flying, gives it the tactical edge, remains right where it should, in the secret realm.
America taps the B-2's iconic status for another kind of mission: deterrence. The Spirit of Missouri was one of 2 B-2s that flew to South Korea in March 2013. This was a not-so-stealthy exercise to temper North Korea's warmongering.
The B-2 is viewed as the man of steel of American air power. You send the B-2 on a mission and it gets everyone's attention. This is a formidable weapon. It can carry nuclear weapons, it can carry conventional weapons, and it, perhaps more than any other single aircraft, symbolizes the might and the resolve and the commitment to deterrence that the U.S. has in the Pacific.
Iran knows as well. The B-2 is a stealth aircraft capable of carrying the 15-ton Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP. These bombs can knock out installations buried deep underground. Her stealth silenced her critics. Through 20 years of trials and triumphs, the B-2 has managed to stay ahead of America's enemies, learning from each new conflict, adapting and upgrading. But for how much longer?
The B-2 is programmed to remain in service until 2045 or beyond. But let me tell you, that is one rugged airframe. And as we are finding with the B-52, it's capable of flying much, much, much longer than we thought. I would not necessarily expect the B-2 to retire in my lifetime.
I think the B-2 stands alone as the most unique airplane ever built in this country. It also changed the design of airplanes for the future. It's the payload, it's the range, it's the stealthiness, it's all of that balanced together with all the modifications and upgrades that will keep it formidable for years and years to come.
The B-2 inspired new generation stealth helicopters that were reportedly used in the raid that got Osama bin Laden. The stealth bomber also blazed the trail for stealthy unmanned aircraft. They fly without risking the lives of pilots at just a fraction of the cost of a B-2. While the future is uncertain, stealth will most definitely be a part of it. And the airplane that set the standard was the B-2 Spirit. Still, the world's one and only stealth bomber.